Hello. Yeah. You guys don't have any tests to take? This is fantastic. I thought there was like 7 people here. It's like finals week, right? That's okay. You'll be fine. You're going to do great.
Study week, so...
Study week. Okay, great.
This is studying. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having
me. So for anyone who's unfamiliar with your previous works, can you give us like a brief little overview of some of the other projects that you've worked on as well?
Sure. I'll try to keep it brief. I'm a USC alum, as I think you guys know. I went to the cinema school here. While I was here, I did a lot of short films. That's kind of how I got my start. And then I did the Coca-Cola Refreshing Filmmakers Contest. I don't know if they still do that. How many people here, by the way, are in the film school? I know it's open to everybody, but oh, wow, awesome. Okay, cool. That was a contest that I did while I was here and made a bunch of short films. Then I actually made some documentaries. My first feature-length film was a documentary called The Short Game, which I followed the best little kid golfers in the world that are like 7 years old around. That's on Netflix. And then kind of a comedic documentary. And then, I made a couple more docs. I made a doc series with, I think my friend Charlotte's here somewhere in the crowd. Yay! I made a doc series about sports mascots with her for Hulu. That was great. We got an Emmy nomination, which was exciting. But that was kind of my start. And then I always loved narrative filmmaking as well. That's what all my shorts were. I just happened to kind of get into the doc space. And so then after one of my feature docs called Becoming Bond, Kristen Wiig saw it. She said we should work together, which was very exciting because I'm a huge fan of hers. So I got to make my first narrative feature film called Barb and Star Go to Vista Del Mar, which was, thank you guys. Which was, a couple years ago. And then, the big thing with that was the release was supposed to be big in all the theaters. But then, of course, we all remembered what happened and we hit a pandemic. And that was sort of just put out on demand. And so this will be my first film in theaters. And that's exciting to me. So yeah.
We love Barb and Star.
Oh, thank you.
It's so funny.
It's very fun to make.
Yeah. So what made you choose Strays as your next project after Barb and Star?
I jokingly said to Kristen and Annie that I just didn't want to work with human actors anymore because they were so difficult. I don't know. I mean, a lot of things. I'm sure like most of you who want to create or make films or create anything interesting, artistic, you're kind of looking. I always want to be doing something that feels new or different, either to myself or to the world. So I think just the concept of doing like a kind of adult dog movie. I grew up on dog movies and loved them, but I was like, this seems like a fun challenge. I got sent the script, and I kind of had the reaction of like, oh, that's a clever idea, R-rated talking dog movie. I remember the log line in my email was, he wants to get revenge by biting his owner's dick off. And I think I had 5 scripts to read that weekend, and that one went right to the top because I was like, this sounds interesting at least. And what really then sort of hooked me in terms of what I love is that it was a very loud idea, but it was it had a lot of heart, and the characters were fairly well developed. We did a lot of work still on the script, but like it was the core of the film was there from the get-go. And so I think it was that mix of kind of doing something new. It was a very funny script. And then it had heart and had, I finally got to meet the writer the first time, and I found out sort of very early, like, this script was born less out of like wanting to do an R-rated dog movie and more out of he was coming out of a toxic relationship. And so this was kind of a fun sort of metaphor for that and how your friends help you through it. And so I was sort of less interested in doing just like a dog movie about dogs, even though it has a lot of that, but always trying to find out what's like the sort of human parallel. Which hopefully came through to some extent for you guys of like, oh yeah, this the best compliment I got is some people say like, I forgot there were dogs while I was watching, which is kind of great. Obviously you don't, but like you kind of hopefully relate to the characters at a human level. So.
For sure. Like you were working with a lot of really talented, really funny actors. Was there a lot of like ad-libbing when you were doing the voice recording? That was certainly a lot. Obviously, when you get Will Ferrell and Jamie Foxx and Isla Fisher and Randall Park in a room, and when you hire them, you kind of want to unleash them. So, absolutely. I did something unique on this film that, weirdly, they don't do very often with voiceover films, animated films, which was I really insisted that they come in the room together, which in general they want to do, but
I think it's a little bit of schedules and this and that, and it's faster and easier for them to just go in on their own. So they're never really acting opposite each other, which I think is why, you know, you don't always get the same kind of organic performance. So every time Will came in, Jamie usually came in, so they were together almost all their voice sessions. And then I had several sessions where I got all 4 of them in a room together, and that was just a joy. And I really encourage them to get off the script and do another thing that often they're told not to do, which is interrupt each other and step on each other's lines. I was really trying to just get them to sound natural and organic and not like a voiceover performance. So, and they loved that and leaned into it. And then, yeah, we did, I mean, the script was fantastic, but then they were incredible with improv, but we'd also do that kind of thing where you alt jokes. So myself and the writer Dan, we would come in with kind of jokes to throw out. And that was a joy. I mean, coming off of a very difficult process of making the film, which had its challenges, as you can imagine, having 4 dogs in virtually every scene. The voiceover was very fun, you know.
Tell us more about working with the dogs.
It was hard. I mean, I sort of knew it was difficult, but they were amazing. I mean, look, the trainers were incredible, and it was such a fun set. Like, it was a very weirdly, like, relaxing, very quiet set. For all of you who've been on a set, usually C-stands are clanging around and people are talking, and this had to be quiet, and the volume of the trainers on any given day was like this. Sit. Okay, come. And step. That's it. That was as loud as our set got the whole time. Just kind of boring. My parents came and were like, huh, this is what you do for a living? I was like, yeah. And so I was kind of amazed that they could get like a dog to walk from that mic stand up here, up the steps, sit down, spin around, pick up a ball, go over here, jump up on the seat, and bark. And you could get that about 8 out of 10 times, which is really impressive. I was like, oh, this is amazing. The problem with this film was you needed that, but then you needed another dog to walk from this mark to this mark at the same time. You needed a third dog to stay here, jump up here at this moment, and the 4th dog had to just lay the whole time. And once you added that in, it just, you know, it was a sort of recipe for disaster. What I did learn in post, I think a little too late, but it was good. I mean, we filmed a lot, but we definitely learned to do a lot of splits, which for those who don't know is, you know, if you liked her performance in one take and my performance in another, you could just, as long as the camera's not moving around a ton, you can put a split right in the middle and you would never know that they're from 2 different takes. So a lot of those kind of 4 shots where you see all 4 dogs or 2 shots, a lot of them in editing, I started using splits, and that really helped a lot. But I didn't know to the extent that I could use that on set, so I was constantly striving to see it all in one take. And I was trying to not just do a lot of singles, which is also, you know, a fallback, and it's when you watch a lot of sort of animal films, that's what you see, is a lot of close-up singles, because it's the easiest thing to shoot. I was trying to get moving masters, where the camera craned down while the 4 dogs walked up, and that just proved difficult, but you know, hopefully it paid off and it had some impact on the experience for you guys.
Can you tell us a little bit more about like the post-production and like the VFX and how you got the dogs to look like they were talking?
Yes. You know, I tried to get the trainers to get them to talk, but that was not happening. Would have saved us a lot of money. Yeah, I mean, post was long. It was interesting. We obviously edited the film without their mouths moving. We previewed, as you guys know what previews are, where, you know, audiences come and grade your film and score it. We did all that testing, previews, without all the animation that you're seeing, so that was kind of interesting. And the film worked in a way without that. It's kind of like, if you remember Homeward Bound in those original movies, they often didn't animate the mouths. But the bulk of post was recording the voices. I didn't start recording Will and Jamie and everyone until after we filmed. I had a temp track on set that I would occasionally listen to with temp actors, but we really didn't start post until after. And back to your question about voiceover, the fun about doing a movie like this, it's sort of a double-edged sword, it's animation in general, I think, is you can keep rewriting. So you can sort of try new jokes. You might have a story beat, you're like, ooh, unlike a live action film, you can write a new line, get it re-recorded, and then try that out at the next test screening or preview. So double-edged sword, because that could go on forever. And if you have a personality like I do, and probably many of you do, it's like you never want to put the pen down. So that can be tricky. But what forces you to put the pen down is the VFX team. So there's a single shot here has a 3-month pipeline. So to work backwards from deadlines, I had to start locking and turning over shot after shot after shot. You know, there's about 14 or 1,500 VFX shots in the film, which is a lot. So it was a long process, and what was the most challenging for me was that before our first preview of screening this film, I was told to lock 500 out of the 1,500 shots, which meant locking the dialogue, locking the take, the performance, all of it. And that's, you know, as a director, is scary, because it's like, well, I haven't even shown this to anyone yet, and you want me to lock 1/3 essentially of the movie. So that was a lot of push-pull and working with the team, the VFX team, but you know. And then a lot of just sitting and watching dogs' mouths move and saying if it looked like a real dog, because I really wanted it to not pull you out. You know, I was hoping it would add, but you know, it's always challenging. So. Yeah.
One of my favorite scenes was the scene where they took all the shrooms, and it was very experimental. Can you tell us a little bit more about that scene?
Sure. Yeah, it was always a fun idea. I mean, it's certainly, we've seen it done, but never maybe done with dogs. So it was like, well, what would a dog's trip feel like? So yeah, we shot it. I mean, production-wise, it was fun. Those were like little chicken patties that we made to look like mushrooms, and the dogs ate them very quickly, and then didn't want to do anything else for the rest of the day. It's one thing you learn quickly. They get their paycheck, and then they're like done for the day. But yeah, we shot a lot of fun. I put Reggie on a dolly for that. You know, we did some zoom dolly shots. Reggie rode on the dolly at one point to get that fun shot, the sort of Spike Lee kind of shot. And then a lot of it was experimenting in the edit. So, you know, and knowing, you know, of course, like, you know, we brought in some visual effects, and I mean, the ridiculous when Doug shows up and then he swirls away in a pube tornado, as we call it. Yeah, it was just fun. I mean, you know, and then of course that hand puppet was my hand, and then my hands came up. The first time I shot, my human hands came up. I realized I left my wedding ring on, and I was like, maybe Hunter's married when he's when he's high on mushrooms. But so we had to redo it. But yeah, it was just, you know, it was very just kind of experimental, fun, trying things out. You know, I like to be in that space where you just anything goes.
Another great scene was the scene where they're in the shelter and they all poop. Can you tell us about that scene?
I'm glad you said that. Show of hands, I'm sure there's some people that wasn't for them, yes? No, yes. There always is. No, it's okay. I've tested the movie enough to learn that no matter if you love comedy or not, there are people I was like, nope, that's not for me. Yeah, that was ridiculous. I mean, I will tell you that was, I forget where we netted out. That's probably a minute long, maybe a minute and a half. I think my first cut was a 3.5 minute like opus of shit, of dog shit. Way too long, much too much visuals. But yeah, it was really fun to shoot. Very weird. The trainers train the dogs to sit on these sort of green stands, and you VFX the green stands out so they look like they're pooping. I was presented with, I think, over 200 different shits that the art department made, and I had to select them for each dog. I mean, it was, you know, this was, I think, when my parents showed up. I was like, yeah, this is what I do for a living now, Mom and Dad. But yeah, it was very fun, and you know, also very difficult scenes, because that scene in particular, that was shot practically. I don't know if you remember the shot where like all the dogs are sitting there staring at Willie the Pound, Brett Gelman, the guy who runs the Pound. I think there's 20-something, maybe 30 dogs in that shot, and that was actually done practically. Well, we got 30 dogs all sitting and paying attention to the trainers, which they were like, I don't know that you can do this, but we pulled it off, but yeah.
Okay, I'm going to ask one last question, and then we're going to open it up to the audience. But my last question, obviously rated R movie, but still dog movie, so parents are still going to bring their kids into it. So at what point do you think the parent would go and take their kid and walk out of the theater?
I hope right when 10 seconds in, Will Forte says, shut the fuck up. I mean, yeah, we're trying to communicate that it's R-rated with the marketing and all that, but yes, I think there's just something about, yeah, you see dogs and it's just synonymous with kids movie. So, look, I'm not going to hate on a little bit of publicity that somebody took their kid to see it, and we're doing our job of communicating it, but if somebody, yeah, I mean, this definitely happened with, what was it, like Sausage Party, I feel like it happened, and maybe Ted or something, so. Yeah, I mean, it's funny, I have 10-year-old twin girls, and they know all about the movie, but they don't really know the movie, because they know most of the plot, but they think it's Reggie is going to bite Doug in the butt. But they'll find out that that's not the plot at some point. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, hopefully people are educated. I don't know. How many of you had seen seen anything about this, like trailer or anything? Okay, and then how many had seen or knew nothing about it? Okay, about half. Yeah. Of those who knew nothing, did you think it was maybe a kid's dog movie? Anybody, or kind of like a dog movie? No. Okay. I mean, we tried to cast it and see, but yeah, I'm sure it'll happen.
It's brilliant.
Oh, thank you.
But it's not for kids.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone in the audience has any questions? Feel free to. There's mics in the aisles. Go ahead.
Sounds like it's on.
Oh, that's hello? Okay. Oh, sorry. Oh, okay. Well, speaking of casting, how long did it take you to cast the dogs? Like, which dogs did you choose? And
Oh, yeah.
How much did the actors get to know about which dogs they were?
Which dogs they're playing? That's a great question. I mean, casting the dogs was fun. What's interesting is none of those dogs, except for one, were trained. The 3 out of the 4 lead dogs were rescues right before. They started training about 2 months before making the film, which is crazy. It's hard to get, Elsa, to answer who's the trained dog. Elsa, the Isla Fisher's dog, Maggie. Elsa's the dog who plays Maggie. She's the only trained dog. So we went up, and there's about 3 or 4 dogs that play each dog. Mainly, like 99% of the shots, it's one dog, it's the lead dog, but usually when they're running, or it's super wide, or sometimes we'd have 2 units, so one unit had a set of 4 dogs and they were doing wide shots up in the mountains or something, and then I was with the first unit main dogs, who were the ones you're used to in close-up. So there was a team of those. The actors, to answer that part of the question, knew they knew their breed and their dog, and they never met them, although I just went with Will Ferrell we have 2 Wills on the movie, to CinemaCon in Las Vegas, and he came out a few days ago with Reggie. So he met Sophie. Sophie is a girl who played Reggie. All the more impressive of her acting. Anyway, so he just met the dog for the first time, but yeah, and then there was one puppy at the beginning of the movie. You guys remember that little dog, Reggie, pops out of the cardboard box? It's sort of when you realize how Doug got her, because his girlfriend wanted the dog. That was a puppy. There was 2 puppies in there. They needed adopting, and so I adopted one of them. So I now have Reggie living with me. I have Will Ferrell running around my house, and one of the other producers adopted the other one. So, yeah.
Hey, greetings. Thanks for coming.
Yeah.
I'm just curious what the process was like doing a studio movie and like working with a writer, as opposed to like movies you might have done earlier in your career. And coming out of USC to do that.
Yeah. It was definitely a step up in the sense that it was, there was a big studio and it was a big budget. But it's sort of like, I've said this before, it's like, it's all the same work, I feel like, from what you're doing at school and in fact, I often felt like short films feel like almost as much work as features, in the sense that you're doing a lot of the same work, often location scouting and casting, you're doing all the same stuff, you're just only shooting for 5 days instead of 45 or something. So in a lot of ways it didn't change much, and then in other ways it's, there's added pressures, and then of course working with very high level cast, which is great, but I loved working with the writer. It's one of my favorite things to do. He was fantastic, collaborative, and I did a lot of sort of roundtables. So in a comedy, I really like to bring in funny people, and we'll sit around for 2 hours and just kind of go through and pitch jokes and pitch dialogue ideas, and so you're kind of just constantly improving it. And we did a few different. I mean, I don't know. I'd have to go in my computer, but I bet you there's 150 drafts, not exaggerating, of the script. So it's a lot. You're constantly rewriting and trying, and a lot of those also become when you're budgeting. So this movie, the budget was grossly affected by how many lines of dialogue there were. So every time we added a line, it was about $15,000. One line, So I was tasked at one point, and this is about, and Universal was fantastic, but there was a budget we had to hit. And once you let Will Ferrell and Jamie Foxx go loose in a room, and I love what they're doing, well, I'm gonna just add more, because it's really funny. And then you go, oh, this is now way over budget. So we had to start to get creative about cutting lines, but also if it was all one shot, it was cheaper than 4 shots, right? So if I didn't, so there's a lot of like weird kind of creative, non-creative work to kind of fight for what I wanted to keep, but also keep us under budget. But I don't know if I quite answered it, but it was, it was exciting, but in a lot of ways, the same. I think what's about to happen is sort of going to be different, right? Which is like, oh, it's going to be in every theater, which is fun. But in a lot of ways, it felt very similar to what I was doing when I was here. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Hello, this is a 2-part question, and both parts have nothing to do with each other.
Okay, great.
1, where did this movie take place? And 2, how did you do all the peeing effects?
Good. Those do not have anything to do with each other. You're right. It took place, I guess I should say, we shot it in Atlanta. For those who know Atlanta, you might have recognized the skyline or some of the places around Stone Mountain. I chose to not necessarily set it there specifically. I sort of kept it, I guess, agnostic in terms of defining it. I don't know why. I just sort of felt like I originally wanted to shoot it up in the Pacific Northwest, and again, back to the sort of creative thing and the budgeting and the scheduling, and then we started to look at, we're going to be shooting late fall, and it starts getting really rainy, shorter days. And then, of course, there's big tax incentives in Atlanta, as you guys probably know. So we shot in Atlanta, didn't really specify that. And then your second question, which was unrelated, was about how did we get the pee effect? I guess twofold. One is you can actually train the dogs to lift their legs, which is kind of crazy. Sometimes the dogs could do it. Sometimes they would lose their balance, and sometimes they'd have to put their foot up on a little resting thing. Occasionally, a trainer would put on a full blue glove and help them hold their leg up, and then we would make the glove disappear. And then, of course, the pee is just a V effect, and they can do it pretty well. Water now and have it actually interact with the fur and all of that. So, I mean, most of the VFX conversations we're in were really ridiculous. These are people doing like really cool, special, fancy Marvel stuff, and I was like, that shit doesn't look quite right. Can you make the pee a little less yellow? Like, those are a lot of the conversations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is also actually Sophie as well, so it's nice to know that me and Reggie share the same name. I love the movie, it was so much fun, and I was just wondering how the Dennis Quaid cameo came into play. Was that like always a part of the script, or was it just like something that was added on later?
Yeah, it was. There was always a bird watcher who was going to notice a eagle carrying a Boston Terrier carrying a Border Terrier. And we just sort of thought, who would be fun to be that person? And ideally, maybe it's someone who also exists in this dog movie world, which for those of you who don't know, Dennis is in all of those Dog's Purpose movies and Dog's Way Home, and as is Josh Gad, who is the narrator dog. So Josh Gad was game. We called him and I said, like, hey, are you cool to kind of like winky, naughty, make fun of your other part of your career and hopefully it won't make that part of your career go away? And he was like, absolutely. So he jumped in. But yeah, so Dennis was game. He loved it. He showed, I think he was even near Atlanta at the time, and he showed up, and it was a half day of shooting, and said thank you, and it was very fun. But yeah, very, very kind of random in a way that I love. We're just like, what? Why is he in this? Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Hi. So, great movie. I've been a fan of xenofiction for a bit, and I was actually wondering in particular how exactly the dog's social dynamics fit in relation to the other animals, as they acknowledged the rabbits as sentient and attempted to communicate with the cats, but were clearly incapable of communicating with avian species.
That is a great question. And I will say that we had some discussion about this very topic. No, I mean, it's sort of true. It's like, all right, what are the rules of our world, right? What are the rules of my movie? What are the rules of the real world? Clearly, dogs can kind of talk to each other, it feels like, right? but they probably have a harder time talking to other species, but maybe those that have been domesticated, they feel like they can come closer to. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know exactly what the question was, but yes, we definitely took into mind this idea that like, okay, they can talk with each other. Clearly we had a sort of thing with humans where they understand some words and not others, and understand tone a little bit, although Reggie is clearly a little bit tone deaf with Doug early on. And then, yeah, of course, we thought about that. Like, we could have it where they can actually communicate with the eagle, but it just felt funnier and felt more maybe accurate, which sounds ridiculous to say, but that they maybe wouldn't be able to speak with birds. Yeah, great question.
There's a novel called Hollow Kingdom set in the Pacific Northwest where the crow is called Shithead or something like that by his owner. You reminded me of that. But my question was about, you may have answered it already with the one shot where there would be four, but you learned a lot from going to school here, it's clear. But what do you wish you would learn back when you were studying that you know now?
Oh, that's a good question. You know, I mean, one thing jumps to mind that I was going to say, I was thinking about on the drive down here, where when I was in the graduate program, there's a course called 508. Is that still a class here? Those in the, yeah? Okay, I hear some, oh yeah. For my 508, which is it's a short film that you make, it's kind of like, it's, I don't know how to describe it, like the stakes get a little higher where you're like, okay, this is important. This is gonna be the film that I make that's gonna launch my career, and, you know, or that's at least how it feels, and that's a good feeling. I think that's, I'm not trying to mock that feeling. It feels that way in a good way. I remember I wanted to make a short film about basically where your socks go when you lose one of them. And I wanted to anchor it around a sock. It was very fun, sort of silly, creative. And I remember my graduate TA telling me not to do that, and that it's like, sort of saying like, well, you're not going to be working with actors, this isn't a great, it says, we're going to show off your direct, blah, blah, blah. You know, sort of like, not in a bad way, but trying to talk me out of it, and I didn't listen, stuck by my guns. And I think that was a lesson that, like, thinking about this film in general is just like do, you know, it's a good reminder of like, make what you want to make, do what you want to do, really try to not listen to others, and really try to listen to yourself is, I guess, a lesson I would like to sort of like, it's not that I wasn't taught it or that I didn't learn it, but I think the more you can kind of hear it, the better, because it will just create more creative, original art. And it's a hard thing to do because we're surrounded by an industry where you're just like, well, that's selling and that made a lot of money and my friend's doing this, and it's like, and I don't know if my idea is any good. Like, it's a lot of that swirling around you. So I feel like the lesson I sort of wish that I heard louder was maybe that TA saying like, go do that. Maybe that would have made me not do it. Maybe I would have the personality. I was like, I'm gonna prove this guy wrong, you know, or something. But I don't know. It's a great question. I have to think more on it. But it was, yeah, it was that was what came to mind. Yeah.
So, in your experience, do you find that studios and production companies are interested in or want original comedy films, or is it like, are they still like more focused on like trying to get like an action film or a franchise or something like that going?
It's a good question. I think that unfortunately, and I'm hoping this maybe can help change it to an extent, but like comedies in theatrically have struggled. If you know, if you're paying attention, it's like, they've just not they've gone by the wayside over, you know, prior to the pandemic, and then of course coming out of the pandemic. So to an extent, I think, yeah, some studios, you know, huge hats off to Universal for greenlighting this movie. Like, this is a pretty crazy one to greenlight. You know, it's not really based on any IP. It's not, you know, there's a lot of reasons to say, easy reasons to say no. And, you know, they're, you know, just put out Cocaine Bear a little while ago, and, you know, they've got and Oppenheimer, and they're, you know, of course that's Chris Nolan, but like, they've got a lot of like, making different and original films, which I'm really supportive of, and psyched that a big studio is doing that. So yeah, it maybe is a little bit harder, I guess, to like get a comedy going and greenlit, but I think to answer maybe the other half of your question, like, I'm a pretty firm believer that everyone, even though yes, a lot of stuff does wind up feeling derivative, I think the bulk of us who work in this industry, producers, studios included, want original. Like, I think they know that, I think that the sort of, it's sort of fait accompli to just be like, oh, we're going to just keep remaking the same thing. I think that winds up happening for lots of different reasons. That, as you're in post and they're like, oh, that thing's working, it can get steered that direction, it feels the same. And also there's a degree of safety net, right? It's like, if you greenlight the thing that seems like it worked 4 other times, well, you might not get fired if yours doesn't work, right? It's like the Harvard defense or whatever that is. You hire the Harvard lawyer because if they lose your case, well, I hired it from Harvard. It's that kind of thinking. It's very fear-based, and I think, unfortunately, if we can get comedies working again, I think it will hopefully open the door back up a little more. But I think everyone's sort of waiting to see that, so it's tricky. But I do think everyone still wants original stuff. At least everyone I'm talking with is excited about original, which is good.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, so it was a very funny movie, but like you said, the script had a lot of heart. And I feel like a lot of times in comedy movies, the comedy undercuts those emotional scenes. I was wondering how you maintain the heart through the comedy, and maybe there's a ratio of like how much comedy and jokes you'd have seen in comparison to a heartwarming moment or an emotional moment.
Yeah, that's a great question too. To me, it's sort of like a director's tone of like, what do you want, right? It's like, so it comes down to, it's a balance, and I'm a fan of, I think that comedies are much funnier when you're invested, when you're emotionally invested, and you're not just waiting for the next joke. And by the way, there's great examples of stuff where you're maybe less emotionally invested, but the comedy writing's so sharp. I often give a TV example that may be relevant, and I loved both of these shows deeply, but at the same time, there was a show, 2 shows were on the air, 30 Rock and The Office. And I always remember, I always watched The Office first. And I think it was because I was fully invested in like those characters and that story. 30 Rock, pound for pound, had like just such great comedy writing, but I think maybe at the costs, and feel free to debate me, and I don't want to be mean to 30 Rock, but it was like, it's a little less emotionally investing. And so for me, in the style of storytelling I like, I will always kind of like start with the heart, start with the drama, make sure that's working. And then what you can do is like, add this joke here, add that joke here, moments that undercut, and then you kind of feel it. Like, did that undercut it too much? Did I just throw out all of that kind of emotional moment? Or did it kind of like release a little bit of tension and prevent it from feeling like schmaltzy and maudlin and all the things you kind of careful of. I also think working with a lot of funny people and comedy writers, comedy actors, there's some reason a fear of being earnest. There's a real like fear of like really showing your sort of raw emotional side. That's changed, I would say, in the last 5 or 10 years, but even still, it's often a push. And sometimes even when I was in the VO booth, you kind of have to like push them, be like, there's no jokes here. Just be present, be emotional in this moment. Here's what it's about. So it's always a balancing act. And then it also just depends on, another director would take the same scene I cut and do it totally different. And it would be great for them. But it's just kind of like you feel it out. But yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just curious if there's any advice you could give from like right coming out of USC, like moves you might have made as a director early in your career that have got you to the point of doing a studio film, or any like pivotal switching points.
Yeah, sure. It's hard to say. Everybody's paths are totally different, but I think there's some consistent ones, which I always try to give the advice of: make as much stuff as you can, show it to as many people as you can, and tell as many people as you can what you want to do. Like, it's kind of like trying to be really simple about it, but like particularly directing, I think if you go like in an agency or in a studio, you might be able to just sort of like, oh, let me get in at the ground and work up, mailroom, etc., assistant. Directing, like, you could know everybody in the world, but unless you have something to show for it, no one's going to hire you because they know you. They're going to hire you because you made this great short or this great commercial or this great doc that speaks to the thing that you now want to make. So you got to make stuff, and you have to show it. as if, and I think that's always a fear, that's a challenge of mine, a fear of a lot of people's. It's like, well, it's not ready yet. It's like, just show it. Show it to your safest friends first, then your less safe friends, and get feedback, but like, just get it out into the world. Like, one of my first things I remember making while I was here was kind of a ridiculous comedy called Border Patrol, that was about there was these guys they called themselves the Minutemen in real life, that were at the US-Mexico border. This was, I don't know, 10 years ago now, more, trying to stop illegal immigration by themselves. This was a real story, and then I made a comedy mockumentary about it. And it just so happened, I kind of put it out there, I put it on YouTube, and all of a sudden a company, Ivan Reitman's company, saw it, and like, people saw it, and I just put it out there, and they were wanting to make a kind of border-related comedy, and that started something. But it was just because I made it and I put it out there, and and then of course telling people what you want to do and meeting people, as like you've heard that adage. I think that's really the bulk of it. Like, you got to just find your like group of friends. I mean, I still am very close to a lot of the people that I met here at school. I have them come, they give me feedback on screenings. Some of them have become editors, some of them have become producers that I work with, some have shot things for me. So definitely, make relationships here, and then try to, just keep them alive as you keep building together.
So you talked about how you went from doing shorts to docs to there, but throughout your career you've done a lot of TV shows. How do you instill like a successful brand into like being comfortable with you directing a TV show after you did a documentary?
Yeah.
Like your previous situation, like Deadbeat, which was like a good show, got canceled too soon, and then like New Girl, which was like 5th season, so you were already established like a style.
Yes. So I think to answer your first question, like how did I get that TV directing job off of documentaries, kind of that?
Yeah.
Yes. So great question. So I showed my work. There was a screening. This is back to the same question of like, I think I showed The Short Game, which is my first feature doc. Much of the town, I had a manager at that point, who then helped create screenings and get people to come show up to them. And so we would have screenings, and Jake Johnson, who is one of the leads of the show New Girl, was just a huge fan of the film. He said, let's get lunch. So I go out and have lunch, and he says, I love your film, we should do some stuff together. So we form a relationship, a friendship. Hey, would you ever want to direct New Girl? Yeah, I love that show. And then so he now is, one of the leads of the show, is putting in a good word. And the doc was very comedic, even though it's not, directing TV. And then I also had a lot of shorts, so I could at least say, oh no, this guy's worked with actors, I'd mostly done narrative work prior. So it's a little bit of a combination of both. But it's sort of similar back to the Show Your Work, which is, I told the story briefly, but it's like, I got Barb and Star in many ways because there was a screening of a film I did called Becoming Bond, where I didn't know it at the time, but Kristen Wiig was there in the audience. And then as I was walking out, she was like, we should work together. And I thought that was just like a Hollywood thing that she was saying to me, like, yeah, let's work together. And then I was having lunch with her a week later, and she was pitching me, this 3-hour lunch of what Barb and Star was, which was amazing over lunch. It was like, this sounded like a crazy, crazy movie. And then she sent me the script, and it was. But yeah, I don't know if I answered everything you asked, but is that sort of it?
Yeah, that pretty much answers it.
Yeah.
And then a quick follow-up, is that how Will Ferrell ended up in this movie? Because he produced that film?
That's right. So Will produced Barb and Star, so I got to know him. I also, there's a million projects I never got to make. So I was attached to a film called Flat Stanley years ago, which is the books. Never got made, but I was directing it. Will was going to play Stanley, and we both decided we should probably figure out how this is to make the VFX part of it work, to make you flat. So he and I did like a 1 or 2 day test shoot, so we became friendly then. And then more friendly on, that movie never got made, more friendly on Barb and Star. And then, yeah, for this one, it was like a very easy call to be like, oh, Will would, and he's the perfect voice for Reggie. And so these relationships kind of build on each other. And I love Will Forte. He's one of my favorites. And so, when I was hoping for Will Forte, well, he calls up, he loved Barb and Star, which was great, but he calls up Kristen Wiig to say, well, what's it like working with Josh? And she said, he's great, blah, blah. So then Will Forte comes on. So it's that kind of, it's just like, I guess the fourth one I should have added to what you should do is I'm a big believer of like, be really kind and You know, it's like, that goes a long way. I think a lot of people, luckily in our industry, I think that used to be less valuable. And now I think people have had enough of that. And so I think those who are unkind are not working as much, which is awesome. So it's like, I think that's a big part of it. You know, it's certainly not a sprint, even though it can feel like it at times. It's a marathon, and you sort of build, you know, you build relationships and build a family and build a reputation of what kind of person you are, and creatively, but also just personally. And so, yeah, so that is kind of how Will came onto this.
Thank you.
Yeah. Hang on,
I'm just like the little French bulldog. Anyways, so from your experiences now, what are the pros and cons of working with animal actors versus human actors? And in the end, would you still prefer non-human actors, or would you want to go back?
Good question. There are definitely pros and cons, which is sort of not just a joke. I remember after shooting and coming home after a day of shooting and being like, I'm sort of done for the day. Because usually, this is with STRAYS, you know, the dogs, usually you're constantly in a great way talking with actors. I mean, on Barb and Star, Kristen, Annie, and I, every night after shooting, every day after shooting, would be back at the same hotel working on the script and lines for the next day. And you often get calls from actors the night before saying, I don't know about this scene, or why am I saying this or this or that, which I love to do. But interestingly, this was sort of like a, you know, a easier, more relaxing production shoot, even though it was very hard to get the dogs to do. But no, I would, you know, there's nothing better than, you know, I loved working with the animals. I thought the trainers did an incredible job. I spent a 2-week period just doing page turns of the script with the training team. So normally I would do that with rehearsals with actors. In this movie, I went through every scene and talked about what my expectations were for what the dog needs to do, the behavior, the emotion. We came up with different behaviors I knew they could train, or they would tell me, well, I can give you this, but I can't give you that. So we would rewrite based on what they could give me. But there's nothing, you know, I still love my human actors the most. So I will likely go back that direction to get a little palate cleanser. And actually, I just went and made a documentary, a documentary a little while ago with Will Ferrell that I can't tell you much about, but I'm really excited about that too. So the relationships continue, whoever asked that question. They are. Yes, humans, back to humans.
Hi. I feel like this movie had really great pacing, and the key to a comedy is, you know, finding the pacing of it and really driving it. And I was just wondering if you had any advice on like a scene-to-scene basis for like pacing the comedy and like finding the rhythm of a scene to like keep it moving, and like when to start, when to stop, anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, I remember learning, I think while I was here, I'm pretty sure, and it was actually probably screenwriting advice, and pacing and screenwriting, you know, script, they're all very related. I believe it was Seth Winston was my screenwriting professor, but he said something about very simply, get into a scene as late as you can and get out as early as you can. And it's a kind of a great rule of thumb. You can kind of just keep moving that edit point further and further in until you're like, wow, really? We can cut all that stuff and the scene still works? And wait a minute, we can get out here and it still works? So that's sort of a just really easy kind of thought, to just take a scene and be like, okay, how short can we make it? And then pacing and rhythm, it's like that's a huge part of directing in a way, right? You're sometimes doing the micro of the on set of the shooting, but once you're in the edit, it's all about that kind of rhythm and flow of like, okay, we're coming off of rapid, we need a breath. We're now off this kind of long emotional, not to call it a lull, but a low, and maybe we need to pick me up, and it just kind of like is very musical, right? Where you're sort of feeling it out. I find that maybe one of the best things, a piece of advice from the way it works for me, is play your movie with people in the room with you. And you will, I think this is probably not just me, I think it would work for anybody. You'll feel it. Like, you don't need their cards afterwards to tell you, well, I was bored here, but I think I feel it in the room where I'm like, ugh. I mean, you can sort of see sometimes people shift in their seats and this and that. Or you'll feel like, oh, that joke, we rushed it, you know, so. I'm a big fan. When I do my edits, my post supervisor gets a little frustrated, but I like to do almost, while I'm doing my director's cut, so when you're doing a film like this, you get 10 weeks before anybody can see your movie to edit. It's DGA fought for that. The studio can't come in, the producers technically can't come in, although they usually invite them in earlier. But when I'm doing that before, I'm almost every week having a screening, usually at the editing offices. So I'm bringing in friends I have on my list, many of friends from USC, Or I'll have them bring friends of friends who don't know me at all, know nothing about the project, because that's great. But I just like to get their feedback, but I like to sit in a room with people. I think that's always works for me, so. Yeah.
Hi. I don't watch a lot of dog movies, but I really enjoyed yours. And my question is, what do you want to see more of in the new generation of cinema that's being made?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I think I was saying it earlier, but I just, I'm assuming it's sort of what we all want, which is original voices and original material and things that sort of challenge what we think of as cinema. And, I don't know, maybe singular voices too. It's like you can tell, I feel like it's hard because filmmaking is a kind of team sport in a wonderful way. And when there's a lot of money involved to make a movie, there's even more people involved, maybe that don't have the best creative instincts, but sometimes they do. So it's hard, but when I think there's like a singular vision that comes through from a writer, a director, auteur, like that's usually gets me the most excited, and I'd love to see more of that. But to be super selfish and for many reasons, but like I would love to see more comedies come back. Part of what excited me about Barb and Star was I was like, there's phases of types of comedy. I grew up on John Hughes, which was like, I love John Hughes, but it was, it was kind of earnest in a way, right? It was grounded, it was Breakfast Clubby, and and things like that I loved. And then there was an era of like really sort of absurdist. This was like, I don't know, Anchorman, Dodgeball. Even before that was Ace Ventura. I mean, there's a sort of this ridiculous comedy. And then we went back in a way, and all this stuff I liked versions of, and then we went back with Judd Apatow to, I would call it sort of like John Hughes 2.0, which was like this kind of, it was back to very real world, about getting pregnant or about graduating or about this and that, but with more F-bombs maybe than John Hughes had, but like, and that was fantastic too. But then I was excited, like, oh, maybe we can go back to that kind of absurdist, which is what excited me about Barb and Star. It was just silly, like super ridiculous and silly. But it just happened to kind of coincide with the pandemic, and I was like, but I was hoping that might bring us back. So I guess that was a long way to say I hope maybe we can see some more comedy as well. Yeah, and I'm so grateful, by the way, that you guys are all out here, because part of the reason this is happening, these screenings, because I think my biggest belief in what makes a movie kind of work out there is like word of mouth. That feels like it to me. It's like I love that Universal's behind this movie and they're going to market it and all that, but like nothing's the same as like seeing the movie and if you like it and then feeling like I want to tell my friends and I'm going to call my buddies to go watch this. So why we're having screenings like this was really like myself, the producer, looked at the landscape of the summer, which is very exciting. But it's like we're in between, Guardians of the Galaxy and and Transformers and these things that are really big, and we're kind of a bit of an oddball. And I was like, oh, maybe if we can show a few hundred people at USC, it'll like put the seeds out. And so if you felt like you liked it, like I know this is me begging you to, can you help me market my movie? But it's real. It's like it's going to be a big summer, which is awesome. But there's a chance that it kind of, gets steamrolled by some giant movie. So I hope not. I hope enough people go out and see it because I'm very proud of it. And I'm like I said, I hope that comedies can make a comeback. So, and maybe this could help in some small way. So.
Thank you so much. So June 9th?
June 9th, June 8th, I think is June 9th.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming back and joining us.
Yeah. Thank you guys. Thanks for coming out.